I always thought my marriage was solid, 10 years with Amanda, no kids, but we had our routines, our life. Then she started coming home late, glued to her phone, acting distant. I brushed it off, told myself it was nothing, until I saw her laughing with some guy at the park, looking way too close for comfort. I didn't confront her right away, but what I found later. My name's Nick, and if you'd asked me a year ago to describe my life, I would have said it was as steady as the hum of a well-tuned engine. I'm 32, a mechanic by trade, and I work at a small garage that my family has run for decades. It's not fancy work, but there's pride in it, getting your hands dirty, solving problems with nothing but a wrench and some grit. People trust me to keep their cars running, and in a town like ours, that kind of trust means something. For 10 years, I've been married to Amanda. She's the kind of woman who, when you first meet her, makes you forget to breathe for a second. That's how it was for me. We met when I was 22, working late shifts at the garage, trying to get on my feet. Amanda worked the counter at the diner across the street. She had this way about her, her laugh could light up a room, and her hazel eyes carried a kind of warmth that felt like home. Our early days were simple but sweet. Amanda would bring me coffee during her breaks, sitting on the hood of some old beater I was fixing up, chatting about her dreams while I wiped grease off my hands. I wasn't exactly a poet, but I told her she was the best thing that ever happened to me, and I meant every word. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony at her parents' house. It wasn't much, just a backyard barbecue with a rented arch and some folding chairs, but it felt perfect. Life wasn't easy, but we had a way of making it work. I threw myself into the garage, working long hours to keep it afloat, while Amanda landed a job as an office assistant at a local accounting firm. Kids were always on the table, but we kept pushing it back, waiting for the right time, which never seemed to come. Our routine was nothing special, but I cherished it. Pancakes on Sunday mornings, porch beers on warm summer nights, sharing laughs over the terrible B-movies Amanda loved to rent. She always joked that I took life too seriously, and maybe she was right. But with her, things didn't feel so heavy. She made life better. Looking back, I see now that I was comfortable. Comfortable with our life, our marriage, the rhythm of it all. And maybe that comfort made me blind to the small cracks that started to show. It began with subtle things. Amanda started staying late at work more often, nothing crazy, just an hour here, an hour there. When I asked her about it, she'd wave it off, saying deadlines were piling up or a coworker needed help. I didn't question it, why would I? She was Amanda, my Amanda. I trusted her completely. But then came the changes. She got a new phone, something sleeker than what she used to have, and suddenly there were passwords where there hadn't been before. She started dressing up more for work, spending extra time in the mirror, and wearing perfume I didn't recognize. When I made a joke about how fancy she was getting for paper pushing, she laughed it off, calling me silly. And then there were the nights she'd come home quieter than usual, her phone glued to her hand, her attention somewhere else. She'd smile when I asked about her day, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It felt like I was talking to a version of Amanda that was just out of my reach, like she was fading into something I couldn't quite see. I told myself not to overthink it. Work was probably just stressful, and everyone has their off days, right? But the truth is, deep down, I felt something shift. I started paying attention, noticing things I'd normally brush off, like how her laughter seemed lighter when she was on her phone, or how she'd move to another room to take certain calls. One Saturday afternoon, I got my first real jolt of doubt. I was driving back from a supply run for the garage when I saw her car parked by the local park. Amanda had mentioned she was running errands, so I didn't think much of it at first. But then I saw her. She was sitting on the hood of a car, a sleek black sedan that didn't belong to anyone we knew. Next to her was a man I didn't recognize. They were laughing, their heads close, like they were sharing some private joke. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, a gesture so familiar it sent a wave of nausea through me. I wanted to pull over, march up to them, and demand answers. But instead, I kept driving, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Maybe it was nothing, a coworker, a client, someone she was helping out. But the way she looked at him, the way her body leaned toward his, it didn't feel like nothing. I spent the rest of the day convincing myself I was overreacting. Amanda wouldn't do something like that, not to me, not to us. I'd built my life around her. I'd spent years loving her, trusting her. The idea that she could betray me felt impossible, like trying to believe the sky could fall. That night, I didn't say anything. She came home, kissed my cheek, and went on about her day like nothing was wrong. I watched her closely, looking for any hint of guilt, any sign that what I'd seen meant something. But she was calm, even cheerful, like the Amanda I'd always known. Still, the doubt lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I told myself I needed to let it go, to trust her the way I always had. But trust doesn't erase what your gut knows. And in the quiet hours of the night, lying awake beside her, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away. This was my life before everything unraveled. A life built on trust, love, and the belief that some things, like a good marriage, were unbreakable. Turns out, I was wrong. The morning after I saw Amanda at the park, I woke up with different minds. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself that what I'd seen was innocent, just a misunderstanding. But as the days passed, the knot grew tighter. Her late nights at work became more frequent, and her phone seemed to be glued to her hand every second she was home. I'd catch her smiling at her screen, tapping out messages with a speed that felt practiced. When I walked into the room, she'd quickly put her phone face down or slip it into her pocket. At first, I told myself she was just being private, maybe texting her mom or friends about something personal. But after a while, I couldn't ignore the pattern. One night, we were sitting on the couch, watching one of those crime dramas she loved. Normally, she'd be engaged, throwing out theories about the killer or cracking jokes about the detectives. But this time, she barely glanced at the screen. Her phone buzzed, and I noticed how quickly she grabbed it, her fingers moving across the screen like she couldn't reply fast enough. "Who's that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. She barely looked up. "Just a friend from work." "Which one?" Her hesitation was slight, but I caught it. "You don't know him. He's new." I nodded, pretending to let it go, but my mind latched onto her words like a dog with a bone. Something about the way she said "him" made my skin crawl. That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every odd moment from the past few months. The new passwords on her devices. The way she'd started dressing up more. The unfamiliar perfume. And now, a friend I didn't know. Was I losing my mind? Was I reading too much into this? I wanted to believe the answer was yes. But deep down, a small voice whispered that I wasn't imagining things. A few days later, my worst fears grew stronger. I came home early from work, something I rarely did, hoping to surprise Amanda with dinner. I picked up her favorite takeout from that little Thai place downtown, excited to see her reaction. Her car was in the driveway, and the house was quiet when I stepped inside. At first, I thought she might be napping, but then I heard her voice. I followed the sound to the back porch, where she was sitting in the corner, phone pressed to her ear. She was smiling, a smile I hadn't seen in weeks. "Stop it," she said, her tone playful, almost flirtatious. "You're terrible." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but I didn't need to. The way she was talking, soft, teasing, intimate, it wasn't how you talk to a coworker or a casual friend. I didn't confront her right then. Instead, I quietly slipped back inside, set the takeout on the counter, and went to the garage. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the wall, my mind racing. When she finally came inside, she acted like nothing had happened. She kissed my cheek, thanked me for dinner, and started setting the table. I watched her, trying to find some hint of guilt in her movements, but she was calm, collected, even cheerful. "How was your day?" I asked, testing her. She shrugged. Same old, same old. You know how it is." She was lying. I knew it. And now, I had to decide what to do about it. The tipping point came a week later. I was driving home late one night when I spotted her car parked at the edge of a shopping center. At first, I thought it had broken down, but as I got closer, I saw two figures inside, their faces lit by the faint glow of the dashboard. It was Amanda. And him. They didn't see me as I drove past, my hands trembling on the wheel. I couldn't make out much in the dim light, but I didn't need to. The way their heads leaned close, the way her hand rested on his shoulder, it was enough. I pulled over a few blocks away, my mind spinning. I thought about confronting them right then, but something held me back. Maybe it was fear of what I'd hear, fear of shattering the fragile hope that I was wrong. Or maybe it was anger, simmering just below the surface, waiting for the right moment to explode. Instead, I drove home. That night, as Amanda slipped into bed beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me. I didn't sleep much after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her in that car with him, laughing, touching, betraying. The image burned into my mind, refusing to let me rest. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was real. And now, I had to figure out what came next. The morning after I saw Amanda with him in that car, everything felt heavier. My hands shook as I poured my coffee, the mug rattling against the counter. Amanda breezed into the kitchen, humming to herself like she didn't have a care in the world. She kissed my cheek and asked if I had plans for the day. Plans? Yeah, I had plans. Plans to figure out the truth. I couldn't go on like this, doubting, second-guessing, living with a knot in my stomach every time she walked into the room. I needed proof. Something undeniable. Something that would make her lies crumble. That day, while she was at work, I drove to the electronics store and bought a small, discreet camera. I told myself it wasn't something a good husband would do, but then again, a good wife wouldn't do what Amanda was doing. I installed it in her car, a place I knew she wouldn't think to check. The guilt gnawed at me as I worked, my hands tightening the screws and adjusting the angle of the lens. But I pushed the guilt aside. This wasn't about being sneaky or paranoid. This was about getting to the truth. Over the next few days, I waited. I didn't check the footage right away, hoping, foolishly, that I wouldn't have to. Maybe she'd come clean, or maybe I'd find out I was wrong. But Amanda stayed the same. The late nights. The text she wouldn't explain. The bright, distant smile that no longer felt like it was meant for me. Finally, I couldn't wait anymore. One evening, after Amanda left to meet a friend, I pulled the memory card from the camera and plugged it into my laptop. My heart pounded as I clicked through the files, each one a grainy snapshot of my marriage falling apart. And then, there it was. Amanda, parked in the same spot behind the shopping center. Him, sliding into the passenger seat, his hand resting on her thigh. Their heads leaned toward each other, and soon, there was no mistaking what was happening. I sat there, staring at the screen, my chest tight, my breath shallow. There was no denying it now. This wasn't just a suspicion or a misunderstanding. It wasn't even just a kiss or a touch. It was everything I feared and more. For a moment, I couldn't move. My mind screamed at me to do something, anything, but my body refused to listen. All I could do was sit there, watching the video play out like some cruel, slow-motion nightmare. Finally, I closed the laptop and stood, my legs shaky beneath me. I looked around the house we'd built together, the life we'd built, and felt a wave of anger and sadness crash over me. This was our life. Our home. And she'd thrown it all away for him. When Amanda came home that night, she found me sitting at the kitchen table, the folder with the printed screenshots and footage in front of me. I didn't say anything as she walked in, just stared at her, my expression blank. "Nick," she asked, her voice cautious. "What's wrong?" I pushed the folder across the table. "Explain this." Her face went pale as she opened it, her eyes scanning the images. For a moment, she was silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "It's not what it looks like," she whispered. I slammed my hand on the table, the sound echoing through the room. "Don't you dare say that." "I watched it, Amanda. I saw everything." Her tears spilled over, and she buried her face in her hands. "Nick, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to find out like this." "Find out what?" My voice shook with anger. "That my wife has been lying to me. That the last 10 years of my life have been a joke." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away, the hurt too raw, too fresh. "It's not about him, Nick," she said, her voice breaking. "It's about us." I felt like I was disappearing. Like you didn't see me anymore. He made me feel alive again. Alive. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the quiet room. "That's your excuse? I was working my ass off to give us a good life, and you were off with some guy who made you feel alive." Her face crumpled, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I stood and grabbed the folder, shoving it into her hands. "You want to feel alive, Amanda? Go ahead. Because you're about to find out what life without me feels like." The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Amanda had always been an early riser, bustling around the kitchen while I nursed my coffee. But when I woke up on the couch, there was no sound of her humming or the clatter of pans. Just silence. I walked into the kitchen, and there she was, sitting at the table with the same folder of evidence I'd handed her the night before. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed red from crying. She looked up as I entered, her gaze filled with something I couldn't quite place: fear, regret, desperation. "Nick," she said softly, her voice cracking. "We need to talk." I didn't sit down. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, keeping my distance. "Talk? You mean the part where you explain why you've been screwing some guy behind my back for months?" She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. The anger that had been simmering since last night hadn't faded, it had only grown. "I know I hurt you," she began, her voice trembling. "And I'm so sorry. But it's not as simple as you think." "Oh, it's not simple." I laughed bitterly. "You lied to me, Amanda. You broke every promise we made to each other. What part of that is complicated?" Her tears started again, and for a second, I felt a flicker of guilt. But then I remembered the video, the way she smiled at him, the way she touched him, and the guilt was gone. "It wasn't about love," she said, her words rushing out like she was trying to get ahead of my anger. "It wasn't even about. You're always working, always at the garage, and I felt like I was fading into the background of your life." "What?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Amanda, I've been killing myself at that garage to give us a good life. To make sure we're comfortable, to fix up this house, to save for the future. And you throw it all away because you needed attention from some random guy." She shook her head, her tears falling faster. "It wasn't random. He listened to me, Nick. He cared about what I wanted. Do you even remember my dream of opening a cafe? I told you how much it meant to me, and you laughed. You said it wasn't realistic." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I remembered that conversation. It had been years ago, one of those passing moments where I thought I was being practical, not dismissive. But hearing it now, through her voice, I realized how much it had stuck with her. "Is that your excuse?" I asked, my voice quieter but no less sharp. "I didn't believe in your dream, so you decided to find someone who would." "No," she said quickly, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. "That's not what I'm saying. I'm not blaming you, Nick. This is my fault. I should have talked to you. I should have told you how I was feeling instead of this." For a moment, I didn't say anything. The anger in me warred with something else, a kind of hollow sadness I hadn't been ready to face. I thought back to the years we'd spent together, the laughter, the shared struggles, the quiet nights on the porch. I'd built my life around her, trusted her, loved her. And now, here we were, standing on the ashes of what we used to be. "I can't do this," I said finally, my voice hoarse. "I can't live like this, Amanda. Knowing what you've done, seeing your face and wondering if I'm enough for you. If I was ever enough." "You are enough," she said, standing and taking a step toward me. "You've always been enough, Nick. I swear to you, I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just, please don't give up on us." I shook my head, stepping back as she reached for me. "It's too late for that. You didn't just hurt me, Amanda. You destroyed everything I thought I knew about us. And I can't," my voice broke, and I had to take a moment to steady myself. "I can't forgive that. Her sobs filled the room as I turned and walked away, my chest tight, my hands trembling. I went back to the couch, sat down, and buried my face in my hands. Amanda stayed in the kitchen for hours, her quiet weeping echoing through the house. I didn't go to her. I didn't have the strength. That night, I called a lawyer. I didn't tell Amanda, not yet. But the decision had been made. Our marriage was over, and there was no coming back from this. Amanda didn't say a word as I got ready for work. Her eyes were puffy, and she moved around like a ghost, her footsteps light, as if afraid to break the fragile silence between us. I left without a goodbye. At the garage, I threw myself into work, my hands busy with wrenches and carburetors, trying to drown out the storm in my head. But no amount of oil-stained bolts or roaring engines could drown out the ache in my chest. Around noon, my lawyer, Grace Morgan, called. Grace was sharp, straightforward, and came highly recommended by an old friend. I told her everything, how long we'd been married, what I'd discovered, and that I wanted out. "Do you have evidence of her infidelity?" Grace asked. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Yeah. Photos, video. It's all there." Her voice softened slightly. "Good. That will make things easier for you in court. I know this is painful, Nick, but the more prepared we are, the smoother this process will go." She asked me to send her the evidence and to start gathering financial documents, bank statements, mortgage records, anything tied to our shared life. The call ended with her assuring me that she'd handle everything. I sat in the office after the call, staring at the piles of paperwork on my desk. This was it. I was really doing this. When I got home that evening, Amanda was sitting in the living room, her laptop open on the coffee table. She looked up as I walked in, her face pale but determined. "Nick," she began, her voice shaking, "can we please talk?" I dropped my keys on the counter and leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. "What's left to say, Amanda?" "I know you're angry," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "And I know I've hurt you in ways I can't take back. But I love you. I've always loved you. And I'm begging you to let me try to fix this." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath to steady myself. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about whether or not you love me. It's about the fact that you lied to me. You cheated. You made a choice to destroy everything we built together." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. "I made a mistake," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But I don't want to lose you, Nick. Please, don't let this be the end." I shook my head, the weight of her words pressing down on me. "It's already over, Amanda. I've talked to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce." Her sobs turned into full-blown cries, and she sank to the couch, her head in her hands. "No," she choked out. "No, please don't do this. I can't lose you." Her pain should have hurt me, but all I felt was numb. "You lost me the moment you decided I wasn't enough." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her to cry alone. The days that followed were a blur of legal paperwork and awkward silences. Amanda tried to talk to me every chance she got, but I kept my answers short, cold, and final. One evening, Grace called with updates on the divorce proceedings. "Nick, I wanted to let you know that Amanda's lawyer has already reached out. She's asking for spousal support." I let out a bitter laugh. "Spousal support? After what she did?" "I know it feels unfair," Grace said gently. "But unfortunately, infidelity doesn't always negate financial responsibilities in divorce cases. The good news is, with the evidence you have, we can argue for a fair settlement. It won't be easy, but we'll fight for what's right." I thanked her and hung up, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. Amanda had betrayed me, shattered my trust, and now she wanted me to pay for it. That night, I confronted her. "So, spousal support?" I asked as I stood in the doorway of the living room, my arms crossed. She looked up from her laptop, guilt flashing across her face. "Nick, I didn't want to, but my lawyer said." "Your lawyer?" I cut her off, my voice cold. "Amanda, you've already taken everything that mattered. Now you want to take my money too." "It's not like that," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm just trying to figure out how to move forward. I don't want to hurt you, Nick." "Too late," I said flatly before turning and walking away. As word of the divorce spread, the fallout rippled through our small town. Friends, neighbors, even Amanda's co-workers seemed to know what had happened. People whispered when I walked into the diner or the hardware store, their pitying looks like daggers to my pride. And then there was him. I ran into him, the guy, a week later at the grocery store. He was standing in the produce aisle, looking as smug as ever. My blood boiled at the sight of him. "Nick," he said, smiling like we were old friends. I was hoping we'd get a chance to talk. I clenched my fists, barely holding myself back. "Talk? You think I want to talk to the guy who destroyed my marriage?" His smile faltered, but he didn't back down. "Look, man, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It just did. I'm sorry." "Sorry?" I spat, my voice low and dangerous. "You're sorry? You think that fixes anything?" He started to say something else, but I didn't let him. "Stay the hell away from me," I growled before walking away, my chest heaving with anger. The days turned into weeks, and the divorce process trudged on, a slow grind of paperwork, court dates, and cold exchanges between me and Amanda. Every time we spoke, her words were tinged with regret, but they didn't reach me. I'd closed that door. She stayed in the house while I moved into a small apartment near the garage. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom unit with peeling wallpaper and a stove that barely worked, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I had a space that felt like it belonged only to me. My lawyer, Grace, kept me updated on every development. Amanda's lawyer pushed hard for spousal support, arguing that she'd grown dependent on our shared income over the years. Grace countered with the evidence of her affair, emphasizing that Amanda had been unfaithful and had broken the trust at the core of our marriage. The court battles weren't easy. Sitting across from Amanda in the sterile courtroom, I couldn't help but feel the weight of everything we'd built crumbling before my eyes. She looked at me often, her expression pleading, but I refused to meet her gaze. When the judge finally ruled, it wasn't perfect, but it was fair. I didn't have to pay spousal support, though I agreed to let Amanda keep the house. The thought of staying there, surrounded by memories of us, felt like torture anyway. When the gavel came down, it felt like a chapter of my life had officially closed. The marriage was over, and for the first time in a long time, I was free. Amanda moved out of the house a month later. I heard through mutual friends that she was staying with her sister in a nearby town. She didn't try to contact me again, and I didn't go looking for her. But I couldn't escape the whispers. In a town as small as ours, everyone knew what had happened. Friends I thought were ours started taking sides, some sticking with me, others giving Amanda the benefit of the doubt. The worst were the pitying looks, the quiet, "How are you holding up?" questions that made me feel like a charity case. I threw myself into the garage, working late into the nights, fixing engines, and keeping my hands busy. The physical labor was a kind of therapy, a way to work through the anger and sadness without letting it consume me. About 2 months after the divorce was finalized, I heard something that shook me. Amanda's affair partner, the man who'd wrecked my marriage, was married, too. And his wife had found out. Apparently, she'd confronted Amanda and him, publicly, in the middle of a cafe. Word spread quickly. The man's wife filed for divorce, and he was forced to move out of his home. I heard he tried to patch things up with Amanda afterward, but it didn't last long. Whatever connection they thought they had wasn't strong enough to survive the fallout. I won't lie, when I heard the news, part of me felt vindicated. It wasn't exactly joy, but it was a sense of justice. Amanda had made her choices, and now she was paying the price. While Amanda's life seemed to spiral, I was quietly rebuilding mine. I started putting more energy into the garage, taking on bigger jobs and hiring a part-time assistant to help with the workload. Business picked up, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of something. I also found a new hobby, motorsports. A client at the garage invited me to a local racing event one weekend, and I ended up behind the wheel of an old stock car. The adrenaline, the speed, the roar of the crowd, it was exactly what I needed to feel alive again. Racing became my escape. On the track, I didn't have to think about Amanda, the divorce, or the betrayal. All that mattered was the car, the road, and the next turn. One evening, while I was closing up the garage, I found a letter in the mail. It was from Amanda. I hesitated for a long time before opening it. When I finally unfolded the paper, her handwriting felt like a ghost from another life. The letter was short and filled with regret. She apologized again for everything, saying she understood why I'd walked away and that she didn't blame me for moving on. But the part that stuck with me was this. "Nick, I know I hurt you in ways I can never undo. I let my insecurities and selfishness destroy something beautiful. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you find peace. You deserve it." I sat there, staring at the letter for what felt like hours. For the first time, I felt something close to closure, not from her words, but from the realization that I no longer needed them. The months that followed were some of the hardest, but they were also the most freeing. I learned how to be alone, how to rely on myself, and how to let go of the anger that had once consumed me. Amanda's betrayal had shattered my world, but it didn't destroy me. If anything, it forced me to rebuild, stronger, steadier, and more focused on what really mattered. The letter from Amanda stayed on my desk for weeks, untouched after that first read. I thought about replying, just to say I'd read it, to acknowledge her apology, but every time I picked up a pen, I froze. What was there to say? What could I say to a woman who'd already ripped my life apart? In the end, I decided silence was my answer. I folded the letter, put it back in its envelope, and tucked it away in a drawer. It wasn't about holding a grudge. It was about letting go. Life after the divorce wasn't easy, but slowly, I started to find my footing. The garage was thriving, with more customers than I could handle at times. I hired another mechanic to help with the load, a kid fresh out of trade school named Mason. He reminded me of myself at that age, eager, hardworking, and still learning the ropes. With the extra help, I found more time for myself. Motorsports became more than just a hobby. I started competing regularly in local races, pouring my energy into rebuilding and modifying old stock cars. It wasn't just about the thrill of the race, it was about creating something with my own two hands, taking something broken and making it run like new. It felt like a metaphor for my life. One Saturday at the track, I met someone new. Her name was Sarah. She wasn't flashy or loud, but there was a quiet confidence about her that caught my attention. She worked as a veterinary technician and was at the races with her brother, who competed in the same circuit. We got to talking over burgers and beers at the post-race gathering. She had a warm laugh, the kind that made you feel lighter just hearing it. We talked about everything, her love for animals, my work at the garage, the thrill of speed on the track. When she asked about my past, I was honest. I told her about Amanda, the affair, the divorce, and the months it took to pick up the pieces. Sarah didn't flinch or pity me. She just nodded and said, "Sounds like you've been through hell, but you're still standing. That says a lot about you." I don't know why, but those words stayed with me. Over the next few months, Sarah and I started seeing each other more. It wasn't anything serious at first, just casual dinners, long conversations, and shared laughs. But for the first time since Amanda, I felt good. Like maybe I wasn't broken anymore. She wasn't trying to fix me, and I wasn't looking for someone to fill the void Amanda had left. We were just two people figuring things out, one day at a time. One evening, months into our relationship, Sarah asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Do you think you'll ever forgive her?" I didn't need to ask who she meant. I thought about it for a long time before answering. "I don't know if forgiveness is the right word," I said finally. "I don't hate her anymore, if that's what you mean. But I don't think I can ever forget what she did. It's more like I've made peace with it. With her." Sarah smiled softly and reached for my hand. "That's all you can do sometimes. Move on, even if you can't forget." Her words hit me harder than I expected. She was right. Forgiveness wasn't about absolving Amanda or pretending the pain didn't happen. It was about freeing myself from the weight of it all. As time went on, the scars Amanda left behind started to fade. The anger that once consumed me turned into something quieter, something softer. I wouldn't say I was grateful for what happened, No one's grateful for betrayal, but in a strange way, it shaped me into the person I was becoming. A better man. A stronger man. A year after the divorce was finalized, I stood in the garage, looking at an old car Mason and I had been working on for weeks. The engine purred to life, the sound rich and steady. I grinned, wiping grease off my hands as Mason whooped with excitement. That night, I took Sarah out to dinner to celebrate. Over drinks, she told me about a rescue dog she'd been fostering and how she was thinking about adopting him permanently. She showed me pictures on her phone, a scruffy mutt with one ear that stuck up while the other flopped down. "He's a little rough around the edges," she said with a laugh. "But I think he's perfect." I smiled, watching her face light up as she talked. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself imagine a future, a real future, with someone new. I don't think there's a single moment when you know you've healed. It's more like a series of small moments, a laugh that feels real, a night where you sleep without dreams, a day where you wake up and don't feel the weight of the past pressing down on your chest. For me, those moments came one by one, slowly but surely, until one day I realized I was okay. Maybe even better than okay. The pain Amanda caused didn't define me. It tested me, broke me, and forced me to rebuild. But in the end, it taught me something important, that even after betrayal, even after heartbreak, life goes on. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it gets better.